All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave here, talking real music in real time for real people just like you and just like me. It's been a little bit over a year since Brian Howe passed away. Brian Howe was the singer for the band Bad Company from, I believe, about 1985 up until 1994. He had an amazing run, especially those three albums: Dangerous Age, Holy Water, and Here Comes Trouble. Um, the first album he did with the group was a little bit under the radar and did have a minor hit song, but wasn't as sought after, wasn't as hard rocking. Was produced by Mick Jones, but the later albums were produced by Terry Thomas with a lot of help from Brian Howe. Brian Howe ended up revitalizing the Bad Company name, and I think Holy Water went platinum. The other two albums, I believe, were gold selling albums, and it was very unusual for another vocalist who was very different from original vocalist Paul Rodgers to come on board and shift the sound of the band from more bluesy oriented rock to more arena sounding rock. But it was actually perfect for the 1980s. And on the albums that Howe and Thomas worked on, the production was more bare bones. The keyboards were more or less gone, and it was guitar driven. It was perfect for rock stations. All three of those albums, I was in radio at the time, and all three of those albums spawned multiple radio hits, in addition to a couple of top 40 songs like If You Needed Someone and Holy Water. But what was really disappointing, and I'm still a little bit miffed by this even now, is that when Brian Howe passed away, word started to travel on social media. And somehow word had gotten to Paul Rodgers, who is the current vocalist for Bad Company. Obviously, he rejoined the band later. And I think it's just him and Simon Kirke now are the two original members. I think Mick Ralphs has retired. Anyway, Rodgers got hold of this information and just told his fans that, he was fine. No need to worry. Everything was fine, because word was beginning to spread that maybe Paul Rodgers had passed away. And rather than clarifying and talking about Brian Howe and talking about his contributions to the band, Rodgers just pretended he didn't hear anything or he didn't know anything. He just ignored it, which was incredibly, guilt by omission. I don't know how to even explain it. It's just bizarre. At this point, somebody is no longer with us, and you're still unable to say anything nice about them. And it was no secret that Brian Howe had trouble with Paul Rodgers and his ego and some of the things about his former band members, including Simon Kirke and Mick Ralphs, especially Kirke, who had said in an interview that, Brian was beginning to be a real pain in the ass to work with, which, again, I think was, at this point in time, a foolish statement to make. Brian Howe and Terry Thomas were doing the lion's share of the production, the writing. Everything you heard on those albums was driven by those two guys. Someone else might come in with a contribution, a writing contribution, and those guys would, work on it and hone it and turn it into something they could use on the album. I just find that Bad Company sort of ruined their reputation when they pretended that Brian Howe didn't exist. And if anything, they owe Brian and his estate, his family, an apology. And that's never ever happened. And I get that when bands get older, they tend to create these narratives about their past. Steve Perry likes to say he was out of music for 30 years or something, which wasn't true. Fleetwood Mac, they are battling back and forth all the time with what narratives are going to keep that band interesting. So people will tune in to find out what's going to happen next to Fleetwood Mac. Some people think it's all orchestrated to make fans want to just listen for, you know, the drama and the aspects of the soap opera, which they actually promote and say, hey, we were always about soap opera. You know, Bad Company broke up in the early 80s because Paul Rodgers wasn't getting along with the other guys. And the other guys decided, they signed contracts. They said, yeah, let's do this Brian Howe thing. They pretend like, oh, we didn't want to really call it Bad Company. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they fought against that. But it was, in hindsight, a smart move. Sometimes these A&R guys and these major label guys know what they're doing. Not always. I'm usually a fierce critic of the focus testing and sort of the tin ear mentality that some of these guys definitely had, because there were so many singles that they just didn't hear. You know, that was their thing. I don't hear a single. And here I am, a radio programmer, and someone sends me, you know, Dangerous Age by Bad Company. And I'm trying to figure out what song do I play, because these songs are all really good. You know, come to find out, they wanted No Smoke Without a Fire. I was cool with that, but there were other tracks on there that we played. And if you go back in history, you can see that there were, you know, 4 or 5 songs that were played on mainstream rock stations in the heyday of mainstream rock radio. It was pretty cool to be a music director at that time at a pretty important radio station for a little while. But getting back to this whole, we're just going to ignore Brian Howe thing, is just really low class. And for me, even though I'm a fan of Paul Rodgers and I'm a fan of Bad Company's music prior to Brian Howe, obviously, and a couple of live albums that I've picked up along the way that the band did with Paul Rodgers over the last 10 years, they're good. Paul Rodgers can still sing. He's a freak of nature. He is an amazing singer, but man, this was just a low-class thing. And, you know, just thinking about Brian Howe, it's been over a year already. And if Bad Company ever does get inducted into the Hall of Fame, now isn't that crazy that I'm saying that? If Bad Company ever gets into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they won't induct Brian Howe. I can guarantee you they won't. In fact, you know, you can petition, you can ask, and I guarantee you it's going to be that original lineup. And yes, that original lineup probably should be in the Hall of Fame. But, you know, Brian Howe kept that band going for a long time. And he ended up being an amazing singer, a formidable songwriter. He went on to create a lot of just high quality solo material following his break from Bad Company. And he's one of these unheralded musicians at this point, and he may end up being just a footnote in rock and roll history. Finally, when Brian passed away, he left us something that I've never heard before. He basically eulogized himself in his song, and he asked a lot of really difficult questions about where he'd be going, meaning the afterlife, what would happen next. And it's one of those songs that even if you're not very religious, if you listen to it, it's going to choke you up. Brian, almost angelic in his vocal delivery on that track, and still proving to everybody that, you know, he was still singing at a 98 or 99% capacity at age 66 when he passed away. So it's just sad to think back on all this stuff from last year. And I care about it probably more than a lot of people do, because I truly grew up listening to Brian Howe and Bad Company. If you're a hardcore fan of Brian Howe, you'll know that he also sang on Ted Nugent's Penetrator album. And he also worked with Megadeth a little bit, which is, again, a little strange, but Brian had the vocal chops to do pretty much anything. So I guess this video, I will leave it here for his fans and his family. And I will ask one more time, for Bad Company, the franchise, to acknowledge Brian Howe one way or another. Say something, anything nice. Look, I get it. You guys didn't like him, and apparently he didn't like you all that much, but nobody stopped cashing checks. You know what I'm saying? In the 1980s, you guys were still cashing all those checks, and you were still filling up arenas. And you can thank Brian Howe and Terry Thomas and that new sound that was created to keep that band going. All right, that's my video, and I'll see you soon.